You know, when you picture a city like Tainan in Taiwan, what's the first thing that comes to mind? It's probably the food, right? All those bustling streets, the incredible smells from the food stalls. But just around the corner from all that amazing energy, there's a totally different story unfolding. A quieter one, all about history, community, and the very soul of the city.
Okay, let's just look at this. On the left, that's the Tainan most people know and love. It's Guahua Street, just packed with people, energy, and incredible food. It's the city's modern heartbeat. But then, on the right, you see Shennong Street. It's like a whole different world, quiet, historic, and literally just steps away. And this contrast, it really highlights a huge challenge that so many historic cities all over the world are grappling with.
And this really gets to the heart of the problem. You've got these two worlds in one city. On one hand, you have that buzzing commercial energy that pulls everyone in, but on the other, you've got this delicate historical fabric that makes the city truly special. So the big question is, how do you keep that past alive and feeling real, without it just becoming another generic, crowded tourist trap?
So how are they actually meeting this challenge? Well, it turns out there's this really specific and powerful idea that's taking hold across Taiwan, and it's offering a fascinating way forward.
But first, just take a second and think about this. It's a problem you see everywhere, right? Those old neighborhoods, the beautiful historic buildings. What actually happens when we just, move on and let them fade?
Well, without a real plan, history usually faces one of three fates. First, it can just be neglected and literally crumble away. Second, it gets demolished to make room for shiny new buildings that, honestly, could be anywhere. Or maybe worst of all, it gets over-commercialized and loses every bit of its original character. And this isn't just a what-if. It was a very real threat for a lot of the historic Japanese-style houses in Taipei that were just sitting empty and vulnerable.
And that is where this amazing concept comes in. Lao Hu Hua Hua, which translates to Old House Revitalization. And this isn't just about preserving a building, like sticking it behind glass in a museum. It's an active strategy. It's about giving these old spaces a brand new job, a new purpose, and actually weaving them back into the fabric of daily city life.
This really nails it. Revitalization isn't about hitting the pause button and freezing a place in time. It's actually a super dynamic process. It's about finding a way for the past to have a real, sustainable, and relevant future.
So what does this actually look like out on the street? Well, to really get it, we're going to look at two different cities that have taken two very different approaches to bringing their old spaces back to life.
So first, let's head back to Tainan. In places like the gorgeous Shennong Street you see here, revitalization is happening in this really organic way. You've got local artists, designers, and small business owners moving into these old homes, carefully updating them and turning them into these one-of-a-kind shops and cafes that totally add to the historic vibe instead of taking away from it. Or you've got to check out the Snail Alley. How charming is that? It was named after a writer, Yi Shi Tao, who once described his home there as a snail's dwelling. So today, the people who live there and local artists have just run with it. As you wander through these quiet little lanes, you find these fun little snail sculptures hidden on walls and door frames. It's just a perfect example of revitalization that's playful and so deeply tied to the local culture.
And that feeling of discovery is perfectly captured by a traveler who wrote this. They said, you can be in the middle of the busiest street, and you just take one turn and bam, you're suddenly in another world, a quiet, historic space that feels like your own little secret.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting, because Tainan's approach is so different from what's happening up in Taipei. Tainan's style is super organic and community-led. You could call it a bottom-up movement, focused on creating a certain kind of creative life. Taipei, on the other hand, has a much more formal top-down system. It's led by entrepreneurs and public institutions, with a focus on building cultural enterprises.
See, in Taipei, a lot of the most valuable historic buildings, like those old Japanese houses, are actually owned by the public. So the city has created these very structured programs to handle their revitalization. You've got universities like National Taiwan University that tender out their historic properties to private businesses to run, and then you have the city government's Old Houses Cultural Movement, which basically acts like a matchmaker, connecting private investors with public properties that need some love and a new purpose.
But here's the thing. At the end of the day, whether it's the bottom-up creativity of Tainan or the top-down structure of Taipei, the projects that really succeed get something absolutely crucial. Revitalization is about so much more than just fixing up old buildings. It's not just about the hardware.
And this brings us to this really deep and beautiful idea, which is especially strong in Tainan, called Zhaopei. The word actually comes from the city's rich temple culture, and it describes the spirit of community. You know, the social networks, the human connections, the shared rituals that are what truly bring a place to life.
So you can really think of it as the two halves of a whole puzzle. For revitalization to really work and last, you need both. You absolutely need the hardware, the beautifully restored building, but just as important, you need the software, that intangible spirit of community, of culture, and that human connection that turns a house into a home and a street into a real neighborhood.
Because ultimately, this is what it's all about, isn't it? A city's true character, its soul. It's not preserved in the bricks and the mortar. It's preserved in the stories we tell, the communities we build, and the new life we manage to breathe into these old, wonderful spaces.
Which kind of leaves us with one last question for you. The next time you're walking through your own town or city, maybe take a look down that alley you've always just passed by. What forgotten buildings and hidden histories are just waiting there, ready to start their next chapter?